I really tried to find it, but turns out there's nothing funny about nuclear nonproliferation conferences. Except maybe one thing. President Obama welcoming 47 world leaders to Washington for this nuclear summit. Maybe the biggest gathering of world leaders convened by a U.S. president since 1945 at the San Francisco conference that founded the United Nations. And now President Obama is the host. So as the host, he had to have one-on-one bilateral sit-down meetings with a whole lot of these world leaders. I mean, they came all this way. They all have egos. Respect must be shown. And we're talking about loose, semi-available fuel for nuclear weapons. So a president's got to do what a president's got to do, which was sort of a version of speed dating diplomacy today. Did you see his schedule today? Small talk with the whole big wide world.
Prime Minister Singh, I haven't seen you since when?
Since those imposters showed up at the state dinner in my honor.
Right. Sorry about that.
Did they wind up on a reality show? I don't get cable.
So, how are things in Kazakhstan?
You know, we didn't find Borat funny.
Oh, me neither. And Bruno? Pfft, what was that? So, President Zuma, you're hosting the World Cup this summer.
Indeed.
We call it soccer.
We call it football.
Okay, hey, I gotta keep it moving here. Good luck, Jonathan.
I get that a lot.
King Abdullah, how'd your bracket work out?
I had Syracuse. Butler totally ruined me.
Tell me about it. So, how long you in town for?
Not long. Gotta get back to Kiev, tie up a few loose ends.
Well, I'm a little pressed for time. Would you be willing to send us all your highly enriched uranium?
Let me think. Okay.
President who? How's everything in Beijing?
Gigantic and increasingly menacing.
Right. I knew that.
That's probably not what anybody said, but the president did cram in 10 meetings of various lengths in 2 days, all heavily protocoled. You know, equal time scheduled for India and for Pakistan, 15 minutes for Good Luck Jonathan of Nigeria, also the delicate dance of telling which leaders that they would be meeting not with the president, but with the vice president. Diplomacy and protocol sometimes result in abnormal and sometimes sort of funny human behavior. But the manic schedule of sit-down meetings, in fact, the entire enterprise of bringing 47 world leaders to the United States to try to build an international consensus on anything, represents something big and fundamentally different about this American government. In the old days, which in this case began in 2001 and officially ended on January 20th, 2009, in the old days we had a very different approach to international agreements of any kind. For example, in 1 week, in July 2001, the Bush administration abandoned the United Nations draft accord that sets out ways to enforce the 1995 Biological Weapons Convention. We refused to join 178 other nations who agreed to implement the 1997 Kyoto Treaty on carbon emissions, and we forced changes to a UN pact to stem the illegal flow of small arms, from handguns to shoulder-launched rockets. U.S. officials signed on only after blocking 2 key provisions that would have restricted arms owned by civilians and sold to rebels. And those 3 examples, clustered neatly into 1 week in 2001, were way before President Bush appointed John Bolton to be our ambassador to the United Nations. John Bolton, better known as John Bolton, who said this about the United Nations, to which he was to be our diplomatic ambassador.
There is no United Nations. Secretariat building in New York has 38 stories. If you lost 10 stories today, it would make a bit of difference.
Yeah, the Bush administration did not like international treaties. That guy they called a diplomat. They broke international treaties under the assumption that our enemies would all break them anyway, so what was the use? Agree or disagree with that approach, this is one of the most fundamental differences between this administration and the last one. This is a big deal. This is one of the biggest fundamental differences between modern conservatives who think that international institutions and agreements are for suckers and modern liberals who think that those institutions and agreements sometimes work. That old mutual pursuit of the mutual interests of sovereign nations thing, you know. President Obama campaigned on change. As it turned out, change did not mean that everybody suddenly had a job or that the banking crisis was suddenly fixed or that our wars magically ended. But change, in part, has meant a return to diplomacy, which means forging not just coalitions of the willing to come along for the ride, but also coalitions of countries of the more or less equally motivated to take on enormous global problems. And in that way, change, big world-changing change, is in fact what we got.